He danced with demons and worked as a shrink in the Clink, a mind hunter who has probed some of Australia's most violent criminals. I'm Penny Lane, and In the Driver's Seat starts now. The life of a criminal psychologist is anything but glamorous. Looking at haunting forensic photographs, often of grisly crime scenes, to sitting face to face with murderers and rapists, delving into the minds of the most violent psychopaths isn't for the faint-hearted, but our guest today has done it. Tim Watson Munro, welcome to In the Driver's Seat.
Pleasure to be here, thank you.
Now, growing up, did you always have a fascination with crime?
Not really. I mean, I grew up in the 60s. There was Perry Mason, great barrister of his day, on television. But true crime really hadn't erupted at that time. I had ideas I might end up as a criminal lawyer at one point, but as it eventuated, I ended up as a criminal psychologist.
And what was your first major encounter with a criminal?
Well, the first job I had, I was lucky to get the job. I was 25 and I was appointed as the resident psychologist at Parramatta Jail in New South Wales. Parramatta Jail then was considered the toughest jail in Australia.
Was it?
It was a maximum security, multi-recidivist prison. And I can remember my first day there, to answer your question, walking through these rusty old steel gates, being wolf whistled at by criminals. I was 25, but I looked about 18, and I was about half my body weight. I was introduced to the jail governor, and he said, "Welcome aboard, son." The last psycho who had this job lasted 3 weeks, just to soften me up a bit. And then I was escorted over to the administration block, and there was a prison officer on the gate. I'd arrived early, and I'd dressed in casual clothes, t-shirt, jeans like I've got on today, but I chose the wrong colour t-shirt. It was green, which was the same colour t-shirt as the prisoners. So when I knocked on the door and I said, "Prison psycho," the prison officer said, "He's not here yet, you dog. Go back to your cell, come back in a half an hour." And I said, no, I'm the prison psycho. So he genuflected with embarrassment and took me into my office, and I was introduced to the first hardened prisoner. They were all hard men. The average time that people were doing in jail there was 10 to 15 years. It was considered an end of the 9 jail, so they tried everything else. They'd committed such bad crimes, they were going nowhere in a hurry. And I worked there for about 3 years before I left. So when I left and I'd become friends with the governor, he said, "We ran a book on you. We were taking bets about how long you'd last, given everything. The best I could get was 3 months. But 3 years later, I left on my terms."
What kind of things did you encounter there?
I was very fortunate again because they'd had a royal commission into prison administration. There had been a riot at Bathurst Jail a couple of years beforehand. The Nagel Royal Commission recommended opening up prisons and making them more available to the public. And because I was working in a jail where nobody was going anywhere, I had considerable licence, notwithstanding my age, to set up programs, which I did. The best two was a day in jail program where young offenders were sent by the court to spend 1 day in prison at Parramatta Jail to see what they were headed towards. It was an experiential learning program. It was extensively researched by the New South Wales Bureau of Crime Statistics and Research, and it was found on a 2-year follow-up to have a 60% success rate of keeping these kids away from courts, let alone jail. So that was one program that sort of launched me into, I guess, national prominence. And the second one was I set up probably the first drug treatment program in a New South Wales jail. Kids were coming in, or young men were coming in. It was a maximum security jail, but it was also a reception prison for people who were locked up on minor crimes. And a lot of them with withdrawing from heroin at the time, so I set up that program. Out of the day in jail program, I was invited to give a paper at a conference in Melbourne. Out of that conference, there was a lot of press interest. I met a forensic psychiatrist, the late Dr. David Syme. He was probably the preeminent psychiatrist in Melbourne at the time. And he said, "You got a lot of talent, you should come to Melbourne." I said, "I'm flattered, but you don't understand. I live in Balmain, between two pubs," and I was a young man. But eventually he started referring work to me. It was well paid and interesting work. He mentored me. So I said, "Look, I'll come down for a year." And that was in 1981. So it's been an ongoing career since then, and I've been very lucky to have been exposed to, notwithstanding it just terms about lack of glamour, very interesting, dynamic, diverse range of human beings.
I bet you have. What a great 2 programs that you introduced. A day in jail, that would have saved so many kids from going down the wrong path that were heading that way. And drug rehabilitation is so important. Now, when you're sitting down with these hardened criminals, murderers, rapists, what's going through your mind?
Well, back then I was young and naive and green, and I had come from a fairly gentrified household. My father, late father, was a professor of physics at Sydney University. My mother was an artist. When I was a kid, we lived in the US for a time. My babysitter was Einstein's granddaughter, Evelyn Einstein.
Wow.
Yeah, so Albert was dead, but his son lived next door. And so that was my background. So going from that into the worst jail in Australia, you can imagine it's a sharp learning curve. But I wasn't intimidated. I think they saw me for who I was, young and enthusiastic and keen to help them. And I never had any problems with prisoners in that jail or subsequently.
Never ever felt fear for your own safety?
No. There was one time where a prisoner came in, he was high on glue. And he came and he was obviously psychotic and delusional. He jumped up onto my desk like a frog and he said he was going to kill me, but I just diffused it.
How?
I said, "Don't be an idiot." That's what I said. Would I do it differently these days? Absolutely. I'm far more aware of my mortality now than then, but it's not a job for the faint-hearted, I feel.
Is there anybody that you found absolutely fascinating, and can you share that with us?
Look, I've had a lot of fascinating people and big cases. I assessed Julian Knight, who did the Hoddle Street massacre. So that's at one end of the spectrum. And at the other end of the spectrum, there was Alan Bond, Australia's richest man at the time. He embezzled $1 billion from Bell Resources. He was an ongoing client for a number of years. He wrote about me in his biography. So, look, I've seen it all. And I guess my method has always been to treat people with respect. I treat people the way I expect to be treated, and consequently they generally relate to me and I get good histories from them.
And do you think that people's mindset can be changed?
I do. I mean, I'm a psychologist of nearly 48 years standing. I think you've got to stay in the job if you are motivated and you believe that people can turn their lives around. But the essence of what I do is not treatment. The essence of what I do is detailed assessments of people prior to going to court. And I produce a report that's tendered in evidence. More often than not, I'm called to give evidence in court, and I stand up to my opinions and so on. But to answer your question, I think that people, given the right circumstances, have the potential for change. How many do, however, I think is in the minority.
Yeah.
It's just too hard, I think, because of various dynamics in their lives that mitigate against that.
Probing into those minds, did it ever affect your own?
Well, it did. 26 years ago, roughly, I had a very well publicised addiction to cocaine.
Oh, did you?
And it went on for a couple of years. I became very depressed. I had a very high profile then. I was like Icarus. I crashed and burned, but I recovered, and so I wrote about that in one of my books, about how depression and how this type of work can creep into your psyche by osmosis. I, in fact, didn't recognise at the time how severely depressed I was. And then I had some treatment. I got off the gear. I was off the bench for a while in terms of being able to practice. I reconstructed my life, and life's better than ever now.
That's good to hear.
Healthy and positive.
How did you know that you were depressed?
Well, look, people told me that I was depressed. I mean, looking back, I was clearly, very depressed, problems getting out of bed, losing task focus, obviously very impaired judgment in terms of drifting into drug use and so on. And in a way, that was self-medicating. But I didn't recognise the intensity of it. My partner at the time said, "You're really depressed." Eventually, I started seeing a shrink, not in the clink. And,
Lucky.
I just went through it all. I went on to antidepressants for a while, and with the passage of time, I recovered. And I think the other thing that now helps me professionally is that I have professional supervision. It's not mandated, but I think it's valuable for practitioners to have somebody that they can talk to about the nature of the work they do, particularly the nature of the work that I do. And so I do that on a sort of semi-regular basis, monthly, twice monthly, every 2 months, and it helps. Uh, Very much in contrast to how I was 26 years ago. There was a lot of hubris surrounding me, probably a lot of arrogance, a lot of success went to my head. And I thought I didn't need help. I thought whatever I was going through, I could manage. And really, it was a big mistake looking back.
Yeah. And what would you say to somebody that's going through that themselves?
Now, put your hand up, go and get some help. I mean, there's some incredibly good psychologists in the community. So good that people can't get appointments now, because I think we've got a sort of tidal wave of stress and depression in the Australian community, and I think it's been augmented by COVID. COVID changed the world. People lost businesses, people's marriages broke down, people developed their own substance use issues. The thing is early intervention and have some treatment.
Yeah, that's good advice. Now, working with all of these criminals, what did it teach you about them? Was there a common thread, or what did you take away from all these years?
I think that people can be born into very adverse life circumstances. That's not the whole story, but it's part of it, where, you're born, your mother might be a drug addict or an alcoholic. You may have a violent father. The sort of social learning that goes on, the role modeling's highly inappropriate. And these kids don't have a chance in many ways. They go to school, their conduct disordered, they drift in with adverse peer groups. They then start dabbling in drugs. They go to YTC or boys' homes. And one prisoner I worked with in Parramatta described it eloquently. He said, "Tim, boys' homes are the high schools of crime, and jails are the universities of higher crime." So once people get on that treadmill, it's very difficult to jump off without intervention. But I think there's more to it these days. There's a lot of substance use in the community. And, if you look at the stats, it's not just people going to jail that are using cocaine and ice. You look at the analysis of effluent in Melbourne and Sydney, it clearly suggests that there are a lot of well-to-do people who are using drugs on a regular basis, but they don't drift into the criminal justice system for various reasons. But substance use is a common ingredient these days. And what's happening with drugs like ice, methamphetamines, is that it accelerates the crime learning curve, because judgment goes out the window, very poor impulse control, an absence of consequential thinking, and drifting in with bad people. You're inevitably going to commit crime, and generally speaking, far more violent crime than in the past.
Yeah, I can imagine. Now, with all the experience that you've learned, is there anything that you can take on to help solving crimes or preventing them even?
Early prevention, and I've been banging on about this really for decades. We need to be doing more in schools. We need to be teaching kids, even in primary school, public schools, problem-solving techniques, conflict resolution. Is there a better way of doing this? Some things are beyond the remit of schools, of course. It's difficult to intervene when you've got a problematic home. Better education, knowledge about the perils of drug use and so on, and teaching kids assertion skills so that if they find themselves in a tricky situation where their mates want to inveigle them into committing antisocial acts, they have the confidence to extract from that. It's very complicated, but at another level, it shouldn't be that hard. Where it becomes hard is a lack of resources and a lack of money. But, you know, the other thing I say is look at the cost benefits of early intervention
Early, yes.
rather than, you know, a lifetime of crime, jail, courts, barristers, shrinks in the clink and so on. It's very expensive.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. That was really, really insightful. I can't believe we're out of time. I would love to keep chatting to you. I've got so many questions to ask you.
I'm happy to come back.
I've got 30 seconds.
Yeah.
How would you gauge success for yourself now?
Leading a very happy life, a strong commitment to my family and kids, enjoying my professional life now more than I have in the past, way more than in the past, because I have the maturity now to put it in a box, and my ego's also in the box. So, you know, life's good.
Good. I'm really happy to hear it. Thank you so much for joining me. Tim Watson Munro in the driver's seat. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
In the Driver's Seat is proudly brought to you by the Perfect Cosmetics Company. You're watching Ticker, and we'll be right back.
You're watching Ticker. We'll have more in just a few minutes.